Ooh, magic.
That's better. All right, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you very much for coming. Welcome, Matthew, for the State of Fedor.
Hello, everybody. I'm Matthew Miller. This is my little bio slide here. This talk was originally pitched by Stephen Gallagher, and he didn't make it, so I am just going to be giving my own talk in place of his. It's a little bit different than, excuse me, I'm allergic to FOSDEM. It's a little different than he had planned. His was going to be a little more technical, I think. This is going to be a little more high level, but I'm going to go through a bunch of slides and probably skip some of the ones that have too much words on them and give some room for questions at the end. Yeah, so this is me. I am the Fedora project leader, which I've been for, I don't know, less than a year now. But I've been involved in Fedora for about 10 years, worked on Boston University Linux as a university sysadmin. So I guess I have some questions for you, too. How many people here are Fedora users? Everybody, awesome. And Fedora contributors? Okay, so a lot of this is going to be old hat to most of you, so I will go quickly through the old hat parts of it. The other question is, how many people would self-identify as a sysadmin kind of background? And then how many people as software developers? And how many people something other than those categories? What are you other people? All right. Okay, so that background kind of feeds into some of the stuff that I have to say here, I guess. Okay, so this is a slide I've been showing for a little while. I got it from a different talk about Donnie from Red Monk gave about the state of distributions overall. So this is the trend line for Google searches of Fedora operating system, and it's their smart magical search so that it is Fedora the operating system, not Fedora the hats, we hope. And this axis is magical Google units, so we don't know what that is, but this axis is time here from 2004 up through like 2 days ago there at that end. So we see kind of a downward trend and less spikiness from the release cycles there as well. And so the important thing to note here is that it's not just that Fedora is terrible. This is a general trend for Linux distributions. Overall, everybody has this exciting peak in the early 2000s, and then down and down and down and down from there. And the important slide here, when I showed this last one, everybody's like, oh, you left off Ubuntu. So Ubuntu is a larger, they're very good at publicity and very popular, so good for them. But we're still in the same boat of everything generally going down overall. And some of the other ones that, if you look on DistroWatch, Linux Mint and Arch Linux are like the top ones up there. They're actually in the Google search, just kind of noise at the bottom. I'm not quite sure what to make of that, but there it is. So first response, oh my goodness, have we destroyed everything? Is the world on fire? No, that's not generally what I'm talking about. It is more a case of this. We have here the world of software, the internet, and everything, full of excitement. And over here, we have the Linux distributions where we have a nice little castle that we're making kind of off in the corner, and we're doing a good job of it. But all of this stuff is going on, and we are kind of missing out on it. So it's not really that. It's more that we've traditionally taken all the software that was out there in that world, this mess of things, and we've made nice little Lego bricks of it, which is cool, and we've done a good job of that. We should give ourselves a trophy. But while we're busy doing that, this is kind of a counter trend. Fedora's going down, GitHub going up. And if you look at the number of packages, and this is actually an outdated slide, this is going to be even more lopsided now because this big red square keeps growing and growing. And this is proportional, the number of packages in Fedora and the number of repositories on GitHub. And even if you assume that 90% of everything is crap, and that for GitHub it's 99.999% of everything is crap, that's still so big that there's so much more enthusiasm about open source software, and almost some of that stuff is terribly licensed and whatever, and a big mess. But there's so much more enthusiasm around open source that we are just not capturing with the traditional distribution model, and we never can because this is just so much bigger than us and exponentially bigger than us that that's going to be a hard challenge. So there's more stuff going on in the world that is different from what we've done traditionally with the operating system. So there's another challenges that we're adapting to. So this is, someone quoted me a talk yesterday. Base operating system is considered boring. That doesn't mean we don't have lots of stuff to do, and there's actually a lot of interesting things going on. But compared to that big picture of everything else going on in the world, it's hard to generate excitement. And this is also partly our traditional model, packaging model, is very sysadmin friendly and sysadmin focused. And one of the other trends in the world, and the GitHub kind of shows that there is sort of the rise of the developer. And if you look at IT and corporate IT, sysadmin power is way down, and developers get what they want more and more in the way that they didn't before. And so that's a general trend, and that kind of influences who's coming into Linux distributions and what people expect from an operating system. And also, that then in turn goes to this idea of the effort and reward balance of getting your software packaged in a Linux distribution. So it used to be in, a decade ago, 15 years ago, that if you had some open source software, if you wanted to show the world that you were really something, getting your stuff into a Linux distribution, into a major Linux distribution, especially maybe in a commercial one, that would be how you would show everybody you've arrived. I've gotten into Fedora, I'm a serious software package. And now, and because of that, we were able to set a pretty high bar. So you have to get your package up to a certain quality, you've got to follow these standards, you've got to have your licensing right, all these things. And people would jump through the hoops we set on purpose because the reward at the end was pretty good. And now, whether or not that reward is any worse, the perception of it is that it's just not worth it as much as it was before because with the way the internet is, you can go direct to your users, and you can be on GitHub is much more valuable than being in the distribution. So that balance has changed, and the amount of work that people are willing to put in to become part of the distribution is different. And then there's this general question of, partly because I think we didn't move fast enough with things in RPM and other that kind of packaging, that every language stack has kind of grown its own package manager for that language stack, and that is what developers tend to use, even if it kind of sucks that all of those things are all different from each other. That is the state of the world, and people don't care so much about having it in a distro package, and in fact, often would prefer it not to be, and would rather set up their own little side universe using the language-specific things. I want to also, this is a quick slide, the OpenSUSE stuff they're doing with the rings model and the continuous integration is amazing. Everyone is awesome. We've got a lot of great Linux distributions. Everybody's Fedora here, but I do want to point out that other people are doing really cool things. And Arch Linux's documentation is awesome. And CoreOS is doing really, really neat things with the next model for distribution that I think that we're doing with Project Atomic as well, and moving to their snappy thing. So it's kind of a general trend there as well. So anyways, back to what's going on with Fedora. We got this Fedora Next thing, kind of planning what the next generation of Fedora is going to look like, kind of in response to all of that before, and just sort of as a general, we've done this for 10 years, let's take stock. The important thing about that is we're not trying to throw away the last 10 years, we're trying to take the lessons we've learned from that and build on it and make new cool stuff without detracting from what we've really succeeded at. And we really have done a great job of taking all that software and packaging it up to very high standards. So I think that's, again, good for us. These are some more of the background things. You can read them. I can answer questions about them more. So on to Fedora 21. One of the most visible things we've done here is have this separate Fedora Cloud Server and Workstation products, though they're not actually products in the sense that we're selling anything. They're just different sort of editions of Fedora that we present to users in different ways. And this is again back to why did we do these things? This is one of the questions I'm still getting a lot. I hope I've explained it pretty well. One of the main reasons are that Fedora came out of Red Hat Linux back in the olden days, which was a general purpose distribution used for a lot of server kind of uses before there was an enterprise Linux that people were sold to a different market instead. And so we inherited a pretty big user base of people using Fedora on servers. And people actually use Fedora on servers quite a lot today. I don't know how many people in this room are using Fedora on a server. Yeah, so a pretty decent section of the room here. And a lot of people are doing that in pretty heavy production, even though that might be a little crazy. I think it's a nice, good kind of crazy. But over the years, it's been the case that Fedora kind of seemed to be more and more of a desktop operating system, and we kind of tried to figure out how are we going to set our defaults and a kind of a Fedora developer voice kind of became focused on making a desktop operating system, and then that became frustrating for a lot of the people using it for servers. A lot of sysadmin voice kind of felt like, my job in Fedora is going to have to be tell those desktop people quit breaking everything. And so the sysadmin voice in Fedora became a very negative stop energy voice, and that's unfortunate because stereotypes aside, sysadmins aren't necessarily really all the grumpy people. I think we just ended up driving away everyone who wasn't grumpy about it and kind of got into a bad situation. So we wanted to make it something where there's something positive in Fedora that was server-oriented, and so people who wanted that out of Fedora had a positive place to make a voice that was building something rather than just trying to block something. Additionally, in Fedora Workstation, we picked this name Workstation instead of just a general desktop, sort of to emphasize that we're trying to make it a little more focused. The year of the Linux and the desktop is something that we can always dream about, but it was probably 2002, and so now we're in a different kind of thing about what we're going to do at desktop Linux. And desktop Linux is still important, but I don't think that it's going to be, at least in the form that we're going to produce, the mass market consumer operating system. Maybe Android is that in some ways, Chrome OS, and good luck to everybody who is working on that. It's great, but I think that it's not necessarily what we can do best, and so we wanted to have something that was kind of more targeted at. In this case, the chosen target is software developers, so people who are building software with their computer, and they're not necessarily developing Fedora, but developing other software. We want to provide a really good desktop experience for those users. Doesn't mean it's not good for other people, because developers are people as well, obviously, but that's the target. And then additionally, Fedora, we've put together a cloud image for many releases now, and it is, compared to some other options, not as popular as I think it should be, because a lot of Fedora's virtues of being fast-moving and innovative are really useful to people who are building things in the cloud, and things that are sort of downsides, like having to reinstall every 13 months, are basically non-issues as long as you can revalidate quickly. So I think that we wanted to make sure we could present our cloud stuff as more exciting and more visible, so it wasn't just something you'd find buried on the download page, but a top-level artifact, and also somewhere where we could try some really experimental things like the Project Atomic, which uses our PMOS tree to put together the operating system rather than installing it with Yum or that kind of traditional package management. So having that as a separate thing lets us be a lot more experimental rather than trying again to follow the defaults of the other versions. So we wanted to grow the user base in some strategic areas and say this is why we want to look at who's using Fedora, and we can actually increase that and have a meaningful impact on our user base. Having these different defined targets makes it easier to know what you're developing for, so that's kind of an easy thing. And then that makes it so we reduce flame wars about what should the file system for Fedora be, and have the people who want to say build RHEL out of Fedora or are using it in a server environment who really care about multipath device mapper and LVM and a lot of heavy file system features, not be in conflict with people who are like, that's totally pointless for the desktop, why would we have that in Fedora? So now we can have the answer be yes to both of those groups. And then again, it really kind of felt to some of the people at Red Hat that Fedora's direction was very disconnected from the needs of RHEL. And that doesn't mean that Red Hat's pulling the strings here, but that's one of our pretty important stakeholders, and we wanted to make sure that we had a place in Fedora that would be responsive to this kind of concerns as well. And so Fedora Server is partly to be part of that. Although the sort of stuff we're doing in Fedora Server is really aimed at Fedora users. It isn't aimed to be Fedora, just what Red Hat's next target is. These are slides you may have seen before, but I like to show them. This is going to have a thing about, I talked about how we're putting all the packages into nice Lego bricks, and that's traditionally what distributions have done. We're making some really nice bricks for you. Here's a big bag of them, and go play. And so this is Playmobil over here, the other toy. I don't know if people recognize that from their childhood or have kids, which is kind of one of Lego's big competitors, and they make play sets that are ready to play out of the box. You open it up and you have your knight and your horse and your castle all ready to go, rather than having to build something out of Lego. And so, but this has cost of flexibility. You can't make that castle into a spaceship. It is always a castle, and it's always that kind of castle. So one of the fears when I talk about what we're doing with Fedora Next is that we're going to take away your Lego bricks and just replace it with Playmobil, and then everything will be ruined. That's not the goal. The goal is instead we're going to take those Lego bricks that we've always made. We're going to build some cool sets out of them. We'll ship you the sets. We'll ship you the instructions. Have it all even pre-assembled into these things. But the bricks are still there, and you can even once you've got it, you can take the bricks apart. We're not gluing anything together. You can build it into your own things as well. So of those things here, Fedora Cloud. I talked about these already a little bit, so I'm just going to show you the pretty logos there. We love the Fedora logo, but it's not very versatile, so we have these new, very simple logos that the Fedora design team came up with that we can kind of use for a lot more different things as well. And so, this is nice logos there. This is some really rough numbers from downloads that I've gotten recently. These are ISO downloads from the server, and there's a whole bunch of caveats here, so that's why I haven't even put numbers on here. But if we look at the ISO downloads of the last couple months of Fedora 21, about 70% is Fedora Workstation, about 20% is Fedora Server, and then about 5% for Fedora Cloud, and 5% for other spins, like KDE, XFCE, and those kind of things. So I think a lot of people are surprised by how popular the Fedora Server is, and I'm not surprised, but I do feel a little bit validated because I've been saying, look, people really are using this for a server. It's not crazy, and the downloads can reflect that. And some of these things are really hard to measure, like the cloud downloads. Presumably, people are also launching that in EC2, or they're downloading it one time, importing it into Glance and OpenStack, and then running it 18 million times. And we have no good way of measuring that. But for downloads, it's 5% there. So I feel pretty good about that at that point. Okay, so here's a really awesomely confusing graph that doesn't connect to the other one very much at all. This is Fedora release by release, starting at Fedora 6, 7, and 8 here. This is connections to the Yum updates. So this has a huge number of caveats here. The data set is basically a number of connections from an IP address per day. So NAT confuses this like crazy, and a whole bunch of other things. And it also, because of that, it really is highly skewed towards North America and Europe, because in places where the bandwidth is not so readily available, people aren't just leaving their systems on all the time to connect to the update server. But I think there's some really interesting things we can get from here. One thing, we go over here, this is Fedora 21 here, and it looks like we've just surpassed Fedora 20 in popularity connections just recently, so that's cool for the new release. One of the general trends, well, first of all, Fedora 8 was immensely popular, and I think it was the version in EC2 for a long time, but I'm not sure what all. It's not just EC2 IP addresses here, so that's kind of a anomaly. If you just subtract that one out, we kind of see this nice pattern of growth up to there, which I'll talk about in a second. But one of the general thing is that we've got about, new release comes out, and about a third of users immediately update when that release comes out, and then over the course of that release, about another third update when the next release comes out, and then there's just this long tail of people who never update their system ever. So that pattern of a third seems to hold pretty true across most of the releases. I think that's kind of an interesting thing about our user base there. And then here we have Fedora 15 here, which is never surpassed 14 in popularity ever, and that's the huge drop here as well, which is, that kind of had a lot of people very concerned about what was going on. But one of the things that you see if we stack this rather than having them lines like this is actually that Fedora popularity overall didn't decline, people just stayed on 14 for a really long time. And I'm happy to see that with 20, we're kind of back up here, and I think 21 is going to go back up there as well. So I'm not quite sure what happened in that time. There was a lot of changes. Obviously, that was the GNOME 3 release, and also systemd. So that was a very disruptive release, so I don't blame people for being cautious there. And I think that over those releases, we've kind of, GNOME 3 has gotten a lot of the rough edges off, and it's a lot much easier to use. Extensions work very nicely, and a lot of the things that really felt like you having a stick poked in your eye were responded to by the GNOME designers, and is a lot nicer. If you haven't tried GNOME for a while, I actually suggest trying it. It's gotten nice, I have to say. And even Linus Torvalds said he could stand it now. And the same thing really with systemd, which yeah, I don't know. Was everybody here for the last talk? There's a lot of cool stuff going on in systemd, and a lot of the things that because we put it into Fedora, it was very rough when it went to Fedora initially, and a lot of those things, a lot of usability things, have become better and better and better over the time, and we've gotten used to it, so it's less scary. I don't know. So another big important thing that happened here is we have a new top-level Fedora governance structure where we have the Fedora Council, which replaces the previous Fedora board. And I think the most important thing here is we kind of have a charter to be more active leadership rather than just a sort of a governance body that waited for things to happen and then issued rulings on them as needed, kind of as a conscience for the project. And this is going to be a little more trying to set direction and somewhere where you want, when you want something that's going to be across the whole distribution, across the whole project, somewhere where you can come and talk to people and then have things that are more of a clarity of message overall across the project. And this is a mix of elected positions and meritocratic positions selected by existing Fedora committees by whatever process that committee feels like is the best way to, we want somebody who represents, the ambassadors, represents engineering on this committee. We'll put you into place there on the committee. And then it also has people like me who are hired by Red Hat to work on it. And I think that Red Hat, a little biased here, I think Red Hat has done a pretty good job of selecting people who are community engaged rather than just hiring random people from outside. And I think there would be rightfully an outcry if they did otherwise. And then another important thing here is that we have a focus on basically medium-term objectives for the projects. We have actually some, one of the main jobs that we're actually working on right now is selecting objectives that say within 18 months we want to have something like the Fedora Workstation Server Cloud split. That's a thing we want to do. How are we going to get there? And then we'll find somebody who will be the champion for that particular cause, and then it gives status reports, and basically there'll be a job that'll be done in a certain amount of time. And those are kind of open for what those can be. It can be something that's engineering related. It can be something else, project communications related, anything like that. And so that's getting underway as well. I can answer more questions about that too. Okay, I'm going to go through this real fast. This is stuff that we hope to do. OpenSUSE is already doing it. That's awesome. Where we have a more modularized distribution where we, instead of having 20,000 packages with basically the same policy applied to all of them, we can say packages that are at the edge, the maintenance is less important. Packages that are more essential to getting your system running maybe need higher level of scrutiny and higher level of maintenance. And so the Environment and Stacks group is going to be working a lot on the modularization there. And sometime in the future, maybe we'll be able to have some sort of Linux apps thing running on Fedora, but that's way in the future. Again, rings. Okay, Fedora 22 coming up. We are going back to a 6-month release cycle and actually trying to be very strict with that to the point where this is kind of actually a 5-month release cycle this time around, which is causing a little bit of pain. We're normally not so strict on this, but we really want to, especially having had a long cycle before. So it looks like this is going to be a fairly minor release with just kind of enhancements and refinements on Fedora 21. Things like Python 3 by default. I had written this in the slide before, but from when I wrote that in the slide to now, it looks like that is actually not going to be the case because we're not quite ready for that. And that is also maybe the case with DNF, the new next generation package manager to replace Yum. It may not be ready to be the default. We will see what the case is with that. New GNOME, some other things like that. But really not a lot of huge changes in this release. Okay, questions? What, I mean, pointed, what's the pointing? There. Yeah. In 22, certainly not. So the question is whether Wayland is going to be the default in 22. I think that it is not ready yet, but I've heard that it might be proposed as a possible default for 23. Some of the things aren't quite ready yet.
I think that the login screen is supposed to be over Wayland in 22 already, and in 23 everything should
Okay,
be ready.
so Christoph says that the login screen might be Wayland in 22, but it won't necessarily be everything else after that. Yes? Far in the future Linux apps. Okay, so there are several proposals for basically running containerized applications for the desktop on Linux, and not necessarily just for the desktop. So, Docker is very successful right now at containerized applications, in server and cloud space. And Red Hat's working really hard on that with their Project Atomic, and we're trying to get that integrated into Fedora as well for server kind of applications. But there's also some efforts to make it so that we can have these containerized apps that would run in a desktop environment. And actually, Wayland is connected to that because that's part of the proposal. Yeah. Yeah, that's actually a proposed feature for the release, is to have Elasticsearch packaged up. So look at Robin cheering back there. I believe that the feature this time is just to get it packaged up so it's easily available and easy to deploy. I think that we'll go from there. Yeah.
So about split between desktop server and cloud. So if I have already installed Fedora, I have upgraded to Fedora 21, and somewhere I have like choice between packages like Fedora release desktop,
Yeah.
release workstation. So what actually the choice of these packages affect?
Yeah, okay, so the question is, if you're upgrading from previous Fedora to Fedora 21 and you choose which Fedora release you want to go to, what is the actual effect? And Steve Gallagher could actually answer this a lot better because he worked on the technical implementation of this. But right now, it affects a few config files and basically which packages are installed in your system. And so there's a mechanism so that, for example, the firewall configuration pulled in is different depending on which one you pick. So the desktop one actually has a very loose firewall rules, whereas the server has a much more tightened down firewall. So it's things like that.
But what if I already have configuration for all of this?
Yeah, so if you have an already configured system, you probably want to choose I think it's called non-product, basically the generic one, and then it will just continue on as you are before with basically no impact on you. And that was, like I said, we're trying not to take away your Lego bricks, so it should be, if you've got something already there, just going on the non-product path should keep you basically with what you have in a nice way. What's that? Yes, right. So that's FedUp, the upgrading script, if you go from one version to the next. And if you don't use FedUp, if you just do a regular update, I think you get that by default. Right, if you want to reinstall, then you have to choose. If you start from scratch, then you choose somewhere to start from, and then you can bring it back to the generic if you want.
What about jump upgrade?
Yeah, I don't know what happens if you do, like there's a Fedora upgrade helper, or just do a yum upgrade from release to release. I think that if you probably want to install the Fedora release non-product package first, and then you'll be guaranteed to get the thing you want. Any other questions? No? Comments? Robin. All right, awesome. Thank you for fetching the Fedora stickers.
The least I can do. There you go.
All right.
There's also a couple workstation DVDs
Oh, yeah.
and 2 pins. Don't poke anyone.
Okay, stickers are here. You can, I guess, come up and get them. I don't know if I can throw them into the audience. I don't know if that'll work through. We got the lovely Fedora workstation stickers and some DVDs for people who still have some sort of DVD reader on their laptop, or else they go nicely on your bookshelf if not. That's